Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you had a great holiday. This season, it seems like it takes a long time to get here, then it's here and it's gone. It's like, wow, I'm ready for 2023 and all to come, right? So hopefully you enjoyed yours. I got a lot of great gifts this year and enjoyed the time with my kids. And, with this show, as you are aware, we've not only brought people with great stories, but also some value to you. And as I look into going into a new year, a lot of people use the first of the year as a chance to reset or align their goals and their visions. That's not necessarily me. I'm kind of, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right now. I'm not going to wait for the new year, but I do understand habits and where people are at in their own minds. So today I've got Dr. Elaine Stageberg on, and we're going to talk a little bit about her own journey, but also some values that she can bring to you. So Elaine, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. As I just shared before we hit record, I think the theme of this podcast is just so valuable. There's so many wonderful things in life, but if we don't say yes to them, we have no access to them whatsoever. So just so thrilled at the premise of this podcast. I'm sure you're bringing a ton of value to your listeners.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's amazing when I look back, I like to look at the analytics of the show and how many guests we've had on here that have said yes to a lot of things. If we added them all up, I mean, we're talking millions here. And what's really cool is the guests that we have intentionally are not celebrity big names, people you normally recognize in the news or on social media. They're just everyday people that have wonderful stories of success that bring great tools back to our listeners and the people that they surround themselves with. And I think that's the important part to notice as a listener, that these guests have real value and they're just like your neighbor or who you are. And they've created some opportunities. So Elaine, could you take us back and give us some of your history and where you came from and where things started for you? And then we can dig in on some of the rich stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Elaine Stageberg. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the owner of Black Swan Real Estate, a real estate private equity firm with $330 million in assets under management. I'm sure we'll talk about my transition from medicine to running a real estate investment company in our time here today. I've been married to my amazing husband, Nick, for 12 years. We run our company together, which brings a lot of challenges, but also brings a lot of joy that we're, building our vision together, both in our professional lives and in our personal lives. We have 4 amazing children under 7 and hope that we're blessed with more in the future. I live in Rochester, Minnesota, like to spend my, my spare time with the kids, reading, all of those fun things.
What's great about your intro there is that you've given huge kudos for your family, your husband and your kids, and the fact that you spend time together. I've been on, not long enough, but just kind of this big push for dads to be involved with their families and really for that family unit to come back together. And I love a successful person that is putting their family first, which you've done in your intro. And but speaking of names, Black Swan, how did you come up with that name? Because I love that name too.
Yeah, thank you. So the Black Swan is the one thing that changes everything. It's the unpredictable event in anyone's lifetime, whether it's an individual or, on the global scale, that changes everything. And when you look back, you think, of course that happened. So like an easy example to think of is, probably many of us have shown up to that, first day of school, whether it's 9th grade or college or whatever it is. And you have some sense during that time that you're going to meet some friends. But one of those days you meet a lifelong friend or a spouse or just a business partner, that special person that really changes the trajectory of life. And it's harder to predict when that event will happen, even if someone is, say, very intentional. Maybe they're doing online dating and they're looking for a partner. You never know when the Black Swan event will happen, when it will be the one, that lifelong relationship. That's an example I love to speak of. And we really think of our company in the private equity and the asset management space as being a Black Swan company that's really changing things. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about how our private equity fund is, completely different than the market norms. And then we also do property management of long-term residential real estate. We've managed all of our properties all the way back to when it was just Nick and I with one single family home as an investment till today, when we have about $1/3 billion in assets under management. And we think of ourselves as the Black Swan management because we're working hard to change the industry as well. So the Black Swan is the one thing that changes everything.
I love that. I'm going to be looking for the Black Swan more often in everything I do. They're out there, right? They're out
They
there.
are. Absolutely.
You've quoted some big numbers, and I'm thinking, well, how did you get into this? I mean, did you jump right out of school and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and my life partner and I are going to do this together? I mean, how did this formulate?
So our very first property that we had as a rental property was the home that I lived in and I owned prior to my husband and I getting married. He owned a home, I owned a home. We made the decision to move into his home. And that was the first time on the real estate side that I really had to say yes. And I'll be very transparent. I wanted to say no. I wanted to sell that property, just move into his home. I had just left my career to start medical school. We had just gotten married. I was hoping that a child would come along. I really perceived real estate investing to be very risky. I wanted to get this, what I perceived to be this burden away from us. And Nick, talked me through it. And we looked through the numbers and said, let's try to rent it, even for a year. And if we don't like it at that point, we can course correct and sell at that time. And I said yes. And it was scary. It got less scary as I went along, like most things do when we have the courage to say yes. We figure it out. We learn the way. Hopefully we look back and say, I'm really glad I said yes, either because it was a success or at minimum because I learned from it and I now know myself better and know the path better in the future. So that's how we became real estate investors. Turns out I loved it. I was able to see that we were providing an amazing home for amazing families. I was able to see our mortgage go down as we continued to pay the mortgage. I was able to see cash flow coming into our bank account, which is always great, but was particularly great because at that time of our lives, I had left my career to go to medical school. So it was replacing a small portion of the income that I was foregoing during medical school. And then the value of the property was increasing. So all of the advantages of real estate investing, I was seeing them with my own eyes. And so we decided to become what I call intentional real estate investors. So we saved up as much money as we could. We bought a home that had been a foreclosure. We did an exhaustive sweat equity renovation, did most of the work ourselves because we didn't have enough capital to actually pay handy people to help us. We had to pay for things like the roof and the HVAC where we needed skilled tradespeople and permits. And that was when I really decided I loved real estate investing. So we built our own real estate holdings over the next many years. And then folks started coming to us just asking, hey, you guys are having a ton of success in real estate investing. Can you help me with that? Or can we do a deal together? Started doing many JVs, a joint venture, started doing property management, just kind of organically grew the business along the way. In 2019, Nick left his career as a career technologist to run our company full time. In 2020, I left my career in medicine to run our company full time. And I want to circle back to that time that I had to say yes. And today we run our company full time together. We have a team of about 25 full-time employees. We have a private equity fund, a real estate sales team, a construction team, a maintenance company, a property management company. We're vertically integrated. We've said yes to everything in the value chain so that we can have control and quality and consistency in our investments, and just so grateful that we get to live this life today and get to help so many residents that live in our buildings, so many of the passive investors that have chosen to invest alongside of us. And then I promise I'll wrap up here, but I want to go back to that in 2020 when I was a physician. I trained at the Mayo Clinic as a psychiatrist, really had a dream career, the opportunity to serve so many people, something I loved to do. But our company was growing very quickly and was very successful. And Nick was running it full time with a team of employees. But it was evident that that's where life was pulling me, whether you God or the universe or whomever that is, it's different for every person. But it was clear that there was a magnetism pulling me toward my business. And I would say that was probably one of the hardest yeses I have ever had to say. Lots of thinking about it, lots of just journaling, just really trying to get thoughts, from my head through my hand onto paper, lots of tears, lots of talking with people that I knew had my best interests at mind. And then ultimately deciding that nothing is ever permanent, that I could always go back and practice medicine.
Yeah.
I love the theme of the book, The Alchemist. I highly recommend it to everyone. It's short. You can read it in a few hours. And basically the premise is you can always go home. You can always go back. And so I said yes. I remember very vividly the moment I said yes. For at least the next 1 year, I'm going to step away from medicine and run the company full time and see where that takes us. And just, for the listeners, maybe there's something in your life right now that you're thinking about or you're considering or you're scared or, whatever those human feelings are that we all have. Saying yes can open a whole new world for you. And then you can always go home. You can always find a way back. You can always find a way to pivot. Very few things in life are ever permanent. But when we say yes and we open ourselves up to opportunities, the universe often rewards us.
I love that. My world, that's, we say that's when God opens up a door, you walk through it and have some faith over that fear.
Absolutely.
And my business coach, David Meltzer, I used to race cars professionally, and it was time to step away from my family. And Dave says, Jim, you can always go back. And what's interesting, I didn't shed tears over it because it was, hobby / career. But, it was a big decision to step away. And when I did, I felt good about it. And when I look back, it's been 4 years now, I look back and go, I'm so glad that I did step away into this new world that I live in, much like yours. I do want to go back to the beginning of your first real estate investment, because you said it was a struggle. You wanted to say no to keeping your property as a rental. Nick convinced you to say yes to doing that. Was it because it was going to create some hardships at the time and you just weren't ready for that? Or was it just the thought of maintaining a rental property and all those? Were you scared, or was it a hardship? Which one was it, or both?
I would say definitely fear, right?
Yeah.
Fear of unknown. It was something we had never done before. Fear of, can we handle maintaining it? Now, luckily, it was a new construction home. So that was actually a big checkbox of, this is a great time to try this with a property that should have very low maintenance. I had lived in it, so I knew the home very well. I think fear around, stepping into something that not only we had never done, but we didn't know very many people in our lives that were landlords that had rental properties. And so figuring out, how do we even market this thing to lease? How do we do a background check? How do we make sure that we get someone who's qualified, who's going to pay, who's going to take good care of it to live in this home? How do we sign a lease? I mean, just all of those things. And then, the fears that I have of, the vision I see for myself is I'm a newlywed about to go to medical school, and I hope some children are coming. Oh, and now I'm also a landlord. I hadn't put that one on the list.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to Nick that he, was calm and persistent and really helped me see the light that this would give us more freedom, not less freedom. This would give us more opportunity, not less opportunity. This would give us more free time, not less free time, and that we would figure those things out. And much like I just, enumerated there, we didn't figure it all out in one day. We stopped and said, okay, we have a property that we would like to lease. First, we need to market it. How do we figure that out? Can we get on Zillow? Can we Google around? There's, lots of real estate, like investor forums and groups. Who can we call? And you just figure things out one day at a time. You just say yes to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And today I'm able to look back at myself, of 12 years ago with, a combination of humor, amusement, grace, of that was like impossible for me, or I perceived it to be impossible for me back then. And today that's it is such a part of who I am. It's how I lead myself, my marriage, my children, my team members. Just say yes, figure it out, say yes to the next thing, figure it out. The truth is, people that are playing at a high level, like none of us really know what we're doing. We're just figuring it out step by step. We're surrounding ourselves by great people. We're working with coaches and mentors and lawyers and attorneys and building the best team. We're saying yes to opportunity. We welcome problems because we know that it strengthens us, right?
Yeah.
We know that just like going to the gym and picking up that weight over and over, that's what makes your biceps stronger. The weight in real life is the problem. That's what makes us stronger. And so that was, that first property was really the first time I really had to exercise that skill of saying, I don't really know how to do this, but it's likely that this is going to lead to good outcomes. And so I'll say yes and figure it out.
You just dropped so many great pieces of information for people to pay attention to. You can hit rewind if you want on this thing. I think it's 15 seconds at a time. But, Elaine, when you talk about figure it out, I mean, look, we've got every one of us has a computer in our fingertips. You've got Google, you've got YouTube, you've got search engines. It's not like you got to wait for the yellow pages to arrive anymore at your house. I'm old enough to have yellow pages when I was a kid. These things can be figured out. And as you suggested, make a list and say yes to each thing as you go along and get it done. It's that fear factor. And I love that you said people operating at a high level don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. We're just willing to figure out the problems and work together. And I thought about something as you were saying that, is that, people that are operating at a high level, we understand that about ourselves. And we're very quick to want to help one another because we know, hey, this person's going somewhere with this. I want to help them out because I was there. And you know what? They'll probably help me out when I need it. And exactly. I just love that. And I want to point out, and you can talk about this, neither one of you or Nick, come from the background of real estate. Mm-hmm. You're going into the medical field. He's in tech, and here you guys are, real estate moguls out here doing your thing with Black Swan. How does that feel when you look back and go, how do we wind up over here?
It feels surreal. It feels like a lot of hard work and putting one foot in front of the other and saying yes, even when it's scary, but also a lot of grace, a lot of something bigger than ourselves has guided us here. A lot of gratitude. The name of the show is Say Yes, but it's important to know what to say no to as well. And the thing that Nick and I do have in common, obviously we had very different careers prior to running our company together, but the thing that we do have in common is we came from nothing. We struggled with childhood poverty. Nick's father was never around. His mother was very seriously ill. He was taking care of her a lot of his childhood. They were homeless a lot of the time. My childhood, alcoholism, drug use. My father was in prison. I never met my mom. I lived with my aunt and uncle for a while and had a lot of love and guidance and care, but we didn't have a lot of money. And so when Nick and I met each other, and you remember we're getting freshly married and starting this real estate venture kind of all at the same time, all within the first few months of our marriage. We knew what we wanted to say no to. Mm-hmm. And it was insecurity, wondering where the next dollar would come from, wondering where the next meal would come from. We knew that would never be acceptable for us as adults and that it would never be acceptable for our children. And so we're just so grateful that today we've been able to steward our own wealth to where we have financial freedom in our 30s that allows us to do crazy things like leave behind really lucrative careers, to believe in ourselves and believe in a company, and then also steward wealth for so many others. I think we learned how to steward wealth when we were kids and we had like pennies or dollars. I mean, we would have to think about, as children, we were the ones thinking like, how is this family going to eat tonight? Mm-hmm. And so today, when we're stewarding, hundreds of millions of dollars on behalf of our passive investors, it's just like a natural skill that we have honed. And it all comes from knowing what we had to say no to, which is we will not continue to live a life of suffering and worry and poverty and insecurity. We are saying yes to a completely different trajectory, one that we have very few examples of how to live it, But just like you said, we'll figure it out. We'll call someone. We'll call the people in our lives that we know who are financially successful. That's how we first learned about real estate. Is we sought out. Sorry for the little slip there. I got so excited on my story. Sought out people that we perceived to be successful, and we asked them, "Hey, can you tell us how you and your family are so successful?" We kept hearing this common theme of being real estate investors. You're only ever one conversation away from changing your life, one conversation or one relationship. And that is available to all of us, no matter where we live in the world, how old we are, what education we have, what resources we have. People want to help other people. And the more we all put ourselves in the path of amazing conversations, the better our lives will be.
That's right. There's that black swan in every conversation. You just got to find it.
Yep, exactly.
Elaine, you skipped over a big part of your story, and I'm going to pull it out of you because that's what I do. And I know it's going to solidify how come you're successful at Black Swan. Now, you started your story with your husband, Nick, and the decision about the house. The part that you skipped over that we're going back to, you talked about growing up in poverty and your challenges. And we don't need to dig into that, but clearly it wasn't a good childhood. It wasn't built on financial strength. How did you buy that first house?
So I was legally emancipated when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I knew very early on that maybe I had to struggle with finances when I lived with my caretakers, but I was not going to do that when I was an adult. So even though I was a very young adult, I was 16, I focused on things like working. I had a daytime job, a nighttime job. I graduated high school early so that I could work more. Once I was able to get financial aid from college, I was able to get like cost of living loans.
Mm-hmm.
And then just saving. The most exciting thing for me was getting that paycheck. And this was, many, many years ago. So I had two different banks so that my savings account was at a separate bank that I had to drive to that didn't have checks where I would make my deposits. It was in like the basement of this old building. I mean, it was the most difficult to access bank I could find, so that I knew once I put money in there to save, it might as well have been gone.
So you did that with intent. You found a
Absolutely.
difficult, challenging bank to access to deposit your savings.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
So that was when I was like 16 and a few weeks old.
But let me interrupt for a second.
Yep. Yeah.
What percentage of your pay did you decide you were going to save?
I never had a percentage, and that's not even something I think about today. I lived very lean and I saved everything I could. And I had like a visceral negative reaction to spending money on things that I perceived to be wasteful.
Okay. Can you give me a couple examples? And by the way, look, I know my neighborhood, I live out here in a farm country, and I'm thinking about these kids listening to the show because there is some poverty out here. And I'm thinking if they can hear this story, if they know that there's an opportunity, right? So, fill us in a little bit more.
Yeah. So I was in college. So I would have been like 18 or 19. And I had a job overnight. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. about 4 nights a week at a gas station. And this is the town where I grew up. I knew many of these people. Many of these people had more than my family had growing up, but we're still very much the working poor, very much, struggling with, even meeting basic needs. And I would see them come in, and I was making what I perceived to be like an extraordinary amount of money at that time. I think it was $725. Like, don't quote me because it's been 20 years, but let's say $750 to round up. I just thought that was like the most amount of money ever. And people would come in and buy soda and gum, hot dogs, and I mean, just things, right? Imagine a trip to a gas station, and next thing you know, you've spent $7, $10. Today that would be the equivalent of $20 or $25.
Sure.
And that negative visceral reaction that I talked about, that was the feeling. I would be like checking them out. Oh, and cigarettes, of course. That's a fast way to spend $5 or $10. Not to mention the health concerns that go with it, but strictly from a financial perspective, I would, you'd hear the ding of the cash register, right? And I'm like, that's like an hour of my life.
Yeah.
Like an hour of my life. And between going to school And I had a work study job at the college where I worked in the lab for several hours a day. I was a biology major, kind of preparing for that career in medicine. And then I would get a little sleep, and then I'd go to the gas station to work. So like every hour of my life was strictly accounted for. It was either school or work or sleep. And so I would like see this experience with people, all night, that they're spending, $7 to $10 on just waste.
Sure.
And I would just think, there's no way I will do that. Every hour that I'm here needs to be an hour that goes into that savings account for I don't know what, but I know that emergencies happen. And I know the feeling as a child when an emergency, and I'm doing little air quotes that no one can see, but when an emergency would happen and there was no money, but most emergencies in life really aren't emergencies.
Right.
We all might have a catastrophic health concern. We all might have a tire that gets a nail in it on the road. We all might have, eventually as homeowners, a furnace go out or something like that. And I hated growing up with that feeling of this emergency has happened and there's no money to be had to handle it. And so I would just look at my savings account, and that was worth so much more to me than any of the extremely short-term pleasures of, a soda or some candy or gum or, whatever those things were. And then just carried that through. So then that led to being able to purchase my first home. I worked with a real estate agent that helped with like first-time homeowners assistant, had a grant to help with the down payment. That home was $145,000. I think I got into it with less than like $5,000 of my savings for the down payment cost because there were some programs available, and still own that home today.
Wow.
I'm almost about 15 years later, still own that home. And I mean, that home alone has created an extraordinary amount of wealth for me. And that all goes back to, basically the money that bought that house was the money I made working in the gas station the 5 years prior.
And not to say that you don't work hard now, because I'm sure you're putting in the hours and you want to willingly, but the hours you put in now are different than the hours you put in then.
Absolutely.
And when you look back on that sacrifice you made then and the value of that, speak on that for a minute, because I can only assume that it's, it was well worth it.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So you're absolutely right. Today in, both of us running our business full time and the financial freedom that we have a lot of flexibility to say, for example, one of the things that Nick and I drew a line in the sand a year ago is we're in the gym 5 days a week, every single day. And that doesn't come from the time with our children. That comes from the time from the business. So that's a luxury that we're able to have because of the financial freedom that we've created. A lot of the work that we do today is things like these podcasts, connecting with people, letting them know about investing in our company, meeting with other amazing entrepreneurs, seeing how they're running their company. Like, it's work, but it's very different, right? As recently as probably even 5 years ago or so, when I was still in residency, Nick was running our company while he was working full time. We were doing a lot of our renovations ourselves. We were still working, metaphorically around the clock. We just both weren't working around the clock. But I remember a many month period where I was working overnights in the hospital. So by the time I got home in the morning, Nick had already left with the children to take them to daycare. And then he would go to his job as a technologist. And then he would get some errands and chores done for our rental properties in kind of that late afternoon time after work. And then I would pick up the kids, I'd bring them home, kind of hand them off to him, and then immediately leave for the hospital. And I remember coming home one morning. It was a cold Minnesota morning, not unlike this morning. It's cold, it's dark, you're driving really slow because of the snow. And I'd been awake for like 24 hours basically in the hospital. And so I was a little bit delirious. And I put on the song Good Old Days by Macklemore. Love that song. Highly recommend it for everyone. And I realized that for the past several months, Nick and I had been working 24 hours a day. And that it was hard, but we also choose to find humor and grace and excitement in it, right? Everything for any of us is the story we choose to tell ourselves.
Yeah.
We chose to tell ourselves the story of, this is awesome. How lucky are we that we're able-bodied, that we have amazing careers, that we have an amazing side project to work on. that we have amazing children. We have the support of our marriage with each other. And I knew in my heart that those were the good old days, that these years of working so hard, I was seeing the fruits of that labor. And I knew that if I just continued to do that for a short period of time, that amazing things would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And today we live a life that I don't know if I really thought I would ever get it. And I certainly didn't think I would get it this young. And so I'm able to reflect back on the days of deciding to be legally emancipated at 16, deciding to work at that gas station overnight, deciding to do rental real estate at a time that was otherwise really challenging in our lives, deciding to have faith and saying yes to things. And, I choose to look back on them with humor and excitement, and, what a privilege that I was able to work so hard, that I had the opportunity to work so hard. And that's what I tell myself now, because I know that another 10 years from now, I will look back on this version of me, and I will say to myself, what an opportunity that you had to work so hard. Aren't you glad you did it?
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing the depth of your story, because so often we look at people that are successful and think, oh, how do they do that? It's so easy for them. They've got these educations and they had these wonderful careers that put them right into real estate. But you talk about working 24 hours a day, the reality of that, right? People don't see the sacrifices made until we talk about them or they find out about them. And I think that's what I love about this show, is that we can pull some of that out. I want people to understand that there is a sacrifice. It's your decision to make that sacrifice for what your goals are. And clearly you and your husband, Nick, were willing to do that, to have what you have today and the freedoms that you have. And I can guess at your age range, and you've got plenty years left in your life to enjoy all the things, all the fruits of that sacrifice you made early on. By the way, people, I talk about 75 Hard quite a bit, the mental strengthening program that I've been on, that Andy Frisella talks about. And I can't help but think about that in Elaine's story, because she talks about the frugal, the wasted money spent. I'm thinking about the person at the counter buying a Monster and a bag of chips. It's $10. Well, if you're on 75 Hard, you're not eating junk food.
No, you're working out twice a day, one of them outside.
That's right.
That's a lot in Montana, my friend.
Well, I just wrapped it up. I had my fourth time doing it. And, but it disciplines to do things like that and to work the way that you and your husband worked. The value received from that is far more than the sacrifice.
Absolutely.
When you're in the middle of it. And if you can identify that while you're in the middle of it, it makes it a lot easier to get to the finish line. So let's talk about that finish line for a minute, and then we can wrap this up. And by the way, I've just really enjoyed your story. I wasn't even looking at the clock, and not that it really matters. So thank you for being so honest and forthright with your story.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Black Swan, what you do, what you offer, and why people should look into your investment portfolio.
So we own and operate Black Swan Real Estate. We're a private equity real estate investment firm with about $1/3 billion in assets under management in Rochester, Minnesota, and Tacoma, Washington. We work with passive investors who invest in one of our private equity funds, and then we acquire long-term residential real estate. We look for deep value add projects where we can do major renovations or management improvements to increase the value of those properties, do a cash out refi, return capital to our investors, and then we keep our investors in the deal indefinitely. So the way we've structured our private equity fund is very different than a typical private equity fund. That was another one of the big things recently in my life that I had to say yes to. So we had done many years of real estate with our own capital. We had done many years of real estate in small joint ventures. And we wanted to move to a private equity structure that would allow us to work with more investors, to buy more buildings, impact more residents. But I didn't like private equity. I didn't like the fees and all the obfuscation and the crazy paperwork and kind of this Wall Street persona that really knows nothing about the boots on the ground work and is just looking at spreadsheets, and it's kind of this adversarial relationship between the capital and the operators. And so I started having conversations with people ahead of me saying, hey, I'd really like to do private equity, but it just feels slimy to me. I just don't feel excited about it. And a number of mentors said, you can do private equity however you want. It's all just legal documents. It's all just a contract. And if you want to set it up that way, just set up your documents that way. And so I had to say yes. And that was really scary. We basically reached out to everyone that had invested in our company in any of those other formats and said, none of those business opportunities will ever exist again. If you want to continue to work with us, you'll need to come into our private equity model. We have no fees whatsoever. Typical private equity has all sorts of fees that like someone in my shoes would collect. We just don't think those are ethical, so we don't collect any of them. 100% of all of our profits go back to our investors until they're completely repaid.
Mm.
It's not untrue to say that essentially Nick and I are working in our deals for several years for free until we get all of our investor capital back to them. And then it's a long-term 50-50 hold indefinitely for about 20 to 25 years. And we really think that's the way to build true passive income and true generational wealth. You know, it's important to note that investors have all of their capital back. So they have $0 in the fund, and yet they have that infinite rate of return and that generational wealth. And so all of those things, you know, we said yes to because we thought it's how we want to make our mark on private equity. Investors love it. We launched our first private equity fund in December of 2021. We had sent out those emails to all of our investors and had said, you know, these previous business lines, they will no longer exist. This new phase of our business is being born. We filled that entire private equity fund in one day.
Wow.
Like completely unheard of in the industry. Our attorneys, our accountants, you know, they were like, I just can't believe this. I've never seen this in the 20, 40 years I've been practicing law or accounting. And I think it speaks to putting the needs of our investors first and saying that we have a unique and different business model. And maybe it's not what's common in private equity, but it's what we believe is right. We believe that it's ethical. It provides great outcomes for the buildings and the residents living in those buildings. It provides fantastic financial outcomes for our limited partners. And our hope now, in addition to getting to $1 billion of residential real estate assets under management, is to change private equity, to be like Warren Buffett, who made the Buffett pledge, who said you can't die with it all, you have to give it away. We want to change capitalism in some small way with what we're doing with private equity. 5% of all of our profits go to charity. Like, imagine if every private equity fund in the country, if 5% went to charity, we could rebuild every road, every school, every playground. Like, it's not much. And my hope is, I used to say 20 years. I used to say, my hope is 20 years from now that we've really changed the industry, but we're already seeing that we're changing the industry. Our peers are coming to us and saying, hey, it seems like what you guys are doing is really successful. Can your attorneys talk to our attorneys to see how we can, copy your business model or learn from your business model? So that's just been, such a blessing that we really are seeing the industry shift in just a few years. I think people see the goodness of this and want to be a part of it. And then another thing we do, kind of to serve a previous version of ourselves for either folks that don't want to invest in the private equity fund, or maybe they're not yet at a stage of their life where they're able to, is we created a real estate investing course. It's called Single Family at Scale. And that was another thing we had to say yes to. A lot of people were asking us for that. And I just had a lot of resistance to it. I'm a person who does deals, not necessarily does education or coaching. And I wanted to do it right, but I just wasn't feeling a pull toward it. So one day I was at a park with Nick and our children, and it just dawned on me, all these people want this course from us and want to learn how to do real estate. I want to serve the previous version of myself when I did that first rental, when I did that first renovation. So we created our course, Single Family at Scale. It's a give what you can model. As little as $100, get someone lifetime access to the course. 100% of revenue goes to charity. And that's what made that a yes for me. That was once that clicked in my head. I went home, we recorded the entire course in like 4 or 5 days time. We had that juice of, we can serve fellow real estate investors, we can spread our business model, and we can raise money for charity. Like, how amazing is this? We've built a playground in our local community. We put a commercial kitchen into a local homeless shelter, all from the folks that have signed up for our course. So another example, 2 examples there of saying yes to private equity, but doing it on our terms, and then saying yes to creating this course because it's what people asked of us, but doing it on our terms in a way that creates a win-win situation for everyone.
I love the story. I love what you're doing. I love your give back. I started an online wine business where we donate a large portion back to the orphanages down in Mexico.
That's amazing.
Like you said, if we all could give back, just 5%, what a wonderful place this would be. And it's great to strive for that. I also love that you're changing the industry that you're in. There's no reason why the rules have to be the rules. If there's a way to do it differently. And you said, it's the right thing to do, right? And to give back the investors' money first before you take. It's pretty amazing. And that
investors come first.
To me, it just shows, your willingness to work for the betterment of everybody. There is a reward for you and Nick down the road, but looking at people's investments and the importance of them and what that means to them and returning that money. Not a lot of people operate that way, and pretty special. I can think of 10 people I'm going to send your website to after I get off the phone with you. And I hope if you're listening, if this resonates with you, whether you're interested in yourself, but if not, maybe somebody else wants to work with Elaine and her husband, because these are wonderful people doing great things. And I just want to thank you for your time on the show. We should probably wrap it up. I've enjoyed your story and what you're doing.
It's been a privilege to record. Thank you.
I've got your website up over here on the left, so I'll make sure to put your website in the show notes.
Yep.
And
meetblackswan.com, meetblackswan.com. That has our calendars. If anyone wants to book a call with Nick or I, we make ourselves very available. Our Facebook group, our newsletter, our investment offerings, it's all right there at meetblackswan.com.
It's awesome. Elaine, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answer is Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer, has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen. And thank you, and have a great week.